All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive, home of the Name Your Price tool. You say how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote. Visit Progressive.com to get started. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, early April 1970, bring out the mothballs, bring out the boxes, because the new Secret Service uniforms are being packed up and shipped off to, well, we don't really know where at this moment, because here's the deal. Earlier in this year, President Nixon had cooked up a plan to refresh the uniforms among the White House staff. He felt that the existing uniforms people were wearing around the White House were, quote, slovenly. So he called up Washington, D.C. tailor Jimmy Muscatello. If you're in the uniform industry, that name probably rings a bell. For the rest of us, I don't know, Jimmy Muscatello. Anyway, he calls up Jimmy. He says, Jimmy, I need you to rework these uniforms. And what he came up with for these new uniforms, we will describe it, but it's safe to say no one was feeling it. The staff hated them. The DC press mocked it. Foreign leaders visiting the White House were like, what's going on with these uniforms? So after a few awkward appearances, the uniforms were packed up, never to be spoken of again until now on this podcast, where we are going to discuss Nixon's Secret Service sartorial situation. Here, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
This story's got me a little punchy.
A little.
Very fun story. Yeah. Our special guest for this episode is Avery Trufelman, brilliant radio reporter, part of the Radiotopia family, long time at 99% Invisible, and moreover, the host of the series Articles of Interest, which takes a kind of very serious but also very fun look at what fashion and clothes mean. So, Avery, been wanting to have you on for a long time. Thank you for doing this. This is great.
Thank you for having me. This is a truly weird little story.
Uh-huh. Yep. And another one where... Yeah, exactly. And another one where, you know, we can tell people, like, maybe hit pause, go Google this, look at the uniforms, and then a lot of this will... But, Avery, we've tasked you with, right off the bat, describe what these poor White House staff were forced to wear.
Well, I don't think you need to Google the uniform. I feel like it's almost a... like a Disney prince, like the prince from Cinderella, without the big epaulets. It's like Prince from Cinderella meets naval captain. They're white. They've got gold embellishments, double-breasted with like the buttons really far from each other, gold trim, these decorative ropes sort of hanging from one shoulder. Very monarchical, very... Yeah, and overtly, like, the fact that they're white is expressly decorative. You know, like, these are men for decoration, which I think is an interesting choice.
I feel so guilty as someone who has watched Frozen and Frozen 2 more times than I can possibly say over the last number of years with my daughter, that I did not make the connection that, like, yes, this is what, like, Prince Hans of the Southern Isles is basically wearing.
Totally.
That big ball scene. And, yeah, exactly. But that's a very good touchstone. Any
But
other
also-
thoughts on the look here?
Also, what a bellhop or a movie usher would
Yes,
wear
yes, yes.
in like the 1950s and 60s. So it really dances that line between service work and Disney prince.
I think the through line for both of those is we're like, King Ludwig II, just like what we think fancy. It's like the McMansion of clothes. It's like, oh, this is what fancy people wear from some bygone time.
Yeah, yeah. Which is crazy because when you think of the Secret Service, aren't you supposed to be sort of conspicuous in your dress? Like, isn't there supposed to be some sort of like you're in the room but you're not in the room, kind of like you fade into the background? I mean, yeah, it makes no sense to me why they would stand out this much.
Well, we should also mention there is a hat.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's a hat.
There is a
horrible
sort
hat.
of firm, inflexible. It's called a Shako hat, but I have to admit I've never heard that word, so that wouldn't evoke anything for me. But it also has like the seal of the president right in the middle. It looks like it's made out of shiny plastic.
Yeah.
It's almost like a structured, pointy architectural trucker hat. It's like a little not for this grandiose costume. It's a little like burp, like
Folks, aren't you glad you didn't go and Google it and instead you got this mishmash of references to paint a picture in your head? But look, and a lot of these things we've been mentioning are actually the reasons that these uniforms appear in the White House. So Nixon, reportedly was sort of infatuated with in a lot of like European honor guards, and when he would go visit or he would see images from more imperial countries and these sort of legacy honor guard kind of uniforms in Europe, and specifically I think he referenced West German police, that is where he got the touchstone from. And I will say, like, Donald Trump went through the same phase too, where he was like, I go to other countries and like all the staff like stands at attention and wears these uniforms, and it's like very symbolic and patriotic and so forth. They tried to imbue a little bit of that. To my mind, it's a little like, a lot of like Latin American dictators, this is one of their first move, was to kind of like put these trappings around them of an imperial presidency. And so I think Nixon certainly had those instincts as well, and this is one move towards that.
You even see that. What are they called? The British soldiers, the red jackets and the big furry hats. There's a
With the
name.
Q-tip hats.
Yeah.
The palace guards.
Yeah, the palace guards have this very, ceremonial sort of uniform to them that is very much a caricature when you think of like souvenirs and what you take home. They're like little teddy bears in the shape of that, or Christmas ornaments in the shape of that. Feels very holiday-ish.
But it's so interesting, right? It just feels like such a fundamental American quandary because we want there to be, the government wants to be present. We want to believe that our tax dollars are going somewhere and that someone's in charge, but it can't be too much. It can't be too frivolous. It can't be too ridiculous. And yet I do think, there is the Navy has a ceremonial guard, like this whole group of soldiers who are more or less, I don't want to diminish the role entirely and call them decorative, but they are trained to be pallbearers and flag bearers and stand at attention for a long time. And they wear these beautiful, crisp white outfits. Like that still exists. And we have that. And we have that desire for a little bit of pomp and circumstance and a little bit of ceremony, but like not that too much. So I don't know. It's like an interesting mix of desires that we have.
Well, so why do you think this backfired? I mean, why did it not work, not just fashion-wise, but sort of like PR-wise? Why did everyone just sort of seem to roundly mock this?
Well, I feel like the interesting thing is sort of the role of the Secret Service, right? Like we were all like, what are they supposed to be doing? What is the utility of these clothes? And I think, the Secret Service was created to detect false currency. It wasn't It wasn't invented to be bodyguards. So I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding. We're like, someone, a fashion historian I once talked to gave me this great line that I think about all the time. He's like, clothing is a language. We need to be able to read it. Because I was like, why don't more people dress up and just, wear feather boas and just wear whatever they want? He's like, because then you can't read that. If I showed up wearing a feather boa, you'd be like, what does this mean? What's going on? I don't understand what to do with this. And he was like, that's why so much of clothing is referential. You're like referencing a cowboy. You're referencing a lumberjack. I'm wearing a pearl necklace that like has a set of associations and references to it so you can read it. And I think this was just, the Secret Service is already like, so what do you do? And I think the references that we just said were like, it's a trucker hat. It's, you know,
a band
King
director.
Ludwig, a band director. Like, what's your job? I don't understand. So I think there is something to having a bit more decoration. As you said, Jody, like there has been this longstanding desire every now and then, which is like, why don't we have a little bit more beauty, a little bit more ceremony in the executive branch? But I think the references were just a little too diffuse for a position that's already a little hard to read.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the references that we've made so far have been, like an imperial guard or like Latin American dictators. And there has been this struggle throughout U.S. history to kind of find the right balance for the story that you're telling about a small d democratic government, that it's supposed to be constrained in some ways, that you call the head of the government Mr. President instead of Your Excellency. And those were very deliberate decisions made in the founding era. And, you know, there's been some flexibility around them over the years. But I think in this case, there's both that it's troublingly out of step with the kind of government we're supposed to have, which the Nixon administration would continue to be over the next several years, but also that it read a little silly. And that's something that people kept referencing was like, y'all look a little ridiculous.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think the other important piece of context, that's a very good point. I think the other important piece of context is like, you know, Nixon was elected sort of at the end of the Peacock Revolution. You know, this moment where suddenly men were free. They're wearing Nehru jackets. They're wearing beads. They're all over the place and they're wild and free. And so while this may not look expressly countercultural, it is coming off of this, you know, Sergeant Pepper. Like it's coming out of this very strange set of decades for menswear, and the election of Nixon himself was a backlash to that.
True.
Yeah. It's no surprise he had that instinct. You know, I will also say, like, I think the way it reads, and it read at the time, I think it reads now, is like a lot of it was just, this was for an audience of one. This was for Richard Nixon. So, you know, Avery, you talked a little bit, and your series is so good about kind of who are you dressing for? Are you dressing for yourself? Are you dressing for others to see you? What does it mean to have people see you? You know, all those dynamics that go into play here. And this felt like a very simple, like, there's one person who wants the people around him to dress a certain way, and like no consideration for the fact that those people are going to be the ones having to wear the clothes. No other consideration for how others would read it, and so forth. And so I think there's just a little
the
of that going on.
practicality of it.
Yeah.
I mean, how they don't look particularly comfortable. When I think about like if you have to grab your weapon or something, like how do you? There's like a belt and all of this. It just feels cumbersome. And that does not feel practical for the job or for the role of the Secret Service.
Let's talk a little bit about how the story turns and a little bit of some of the details of what comes next. So first off, we should say these uniforms cost about $95 each, which is about $700 today, and about 100 people got these uniforms. So not, you know, an insignificant amount of money. I love this. January 28th, when these roll out, the New York Times runs a headline that says, White House police don dazzling new uniforms. The next day, January 29th, the AP runs a report that says designers rip Nixon uniforms. So they went from dazzling to designers are ripping these uniforms in 24 hours. You know, these did not have a real, there was not much of a honeymoon with these.
I mean, you know, I will say it's very interesting because throughout time there have been so many attempts to like, let's redesign police uniforms, right? And you know, it's like the nambiest, pambiest, lowest stakes way to be like, let's reconsider the police. And people are either like, this is stupid, it doesn't work, it's not enough. And like, these are all fair points. But like, honestly, I do think it's worth attempting to like reconsider what we think power looks like. And there is some sort of power in being like, this is, you know, they're not hiding. They're overt. They are symbolic in a lot of ways. It's changing the meaning of what it means to be someone, you know, carrying a gun next to the most powerful person in the country. And so it's a shame because that all of these experiments are always so short-lived and hung up on aesthetics.
I think about how should we think about this protecting force, this like powerful force, and even in some ways manly force, because when I think about there are women in the Secret Service, what do they look like? What should they look like? They're valid questions.
And also in sharp contrast to leaders in other countries who often have a much more visible set of bodyguards, including Vladimir Putin, right? Like his bodyguards are there to make sure that you see them. They're not meant to blend in. They're supposed to be a display of power and protection. And so there's not just a difference in aesthetics, but there's a difference, as Avery was saying, in messaging and storytelling.
All right, very quickly, these are roundly mocked. People don't really get what's going on here. There's people are writing columns that are calling them kind of comical. Even like supporters of Nixon are sort of saying, this might be a little much. It's really a 2-week thing. Basically, after 2 weeks, they start to say, okay, well, that happened. That was a bit of a mistake. So what comes next with these uniforms?
So, they were mothballed, but before they were, there was an effort to reassess or reinterpret them. So maybe you pull off the rope, or you just try using the tunic, or you just try using the pants, which were black with a long metallic stripe down the sides. You get rid of the hats, see what works. So there were a lot of efforts to try to style them differently so that they might not elicit so much scorn and mockery. But I think that once that ball's gotten rolling, it's really hard to rein it back in.
But Avery, I feel like a good lesson here, right? If your ensemble's not working, think about the components. It might be arrangement as much as it is ensemble.
Yeah, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know?
Well, what Coco Chanel always says. She says, always remove the last thing you put on. So when we tend to over-accessorize, maybe that extra beaded, braided gold sash can go.
Yes.
Well, about a decade later, they're rediscovered and they're repurposed. For a deep, deep, deep discount, they are sold to a school district marching band in Iowa. They were having trouble raising money for uniforms, so for $90 that they give to the General Services Administration, they get these uniforms. They seem to have outbid Alice Cooper, who...
Such a good wrinkle.
He had the money, but federal regulations meant that he couldn't use them to outfit his crew. So you're kind of getting the aesthetic here, either glam rock or school band. I should say the school band uniforms did not go over well. The people wearing them were mocked. Again, these very mockable uniforms. One Iowa official said they were pitiful and looked European and out of place. European in Iowa is a slur. And it was also noted that they had, quote, sort of a Nazi connotation.
Oh, geez.
They're not wrong.
I mean, I thought they were perfect for a school band. Maybe that's just me, but I was like, this seems like the perfect transfer. Yes.
Yeah, it just seems like it's so unfair that they get mocked every single place they go. I think the fundamental larger arc is how impossible it is, especially for men, to dress up. Like you put on something with a gold accent and people are like, that's dumb, take it off. It's like so
that's
unfair.
European.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, that sounds a little like dog whistly. I don't know.
Yeah, even a flower, too much.
I do want to just take a moment and paint the picture here of it's the late 70s, maybe early 80s. You're in a marching band. You live in the town of Meridian, Iowa, which I'm looking it up right now, population 161.
Oh.
Your marching band director says, hey, we got some new uniforms. And you go, oh, cool. Where did these come from? Well, they're decades-old Secret Service uniforms that we bought for $90
Wow.
from the Nixon White House. Nixon, at this point, disgraced, impeached, gone from the scene. I would be like, did I enter some weird dimension? Like, what is going on? Like, it's like the strangest thing that these ended up in Iowa. And moreover, oh yeah, and by the way, we also outbid glam rocker Alice Cooper, who wanted his roadies to wear these uniforms on his latest tour. I mean, it's just like the strangest collection of facts possible. But there are some amazing pictures out there of this marching band in the middle of Iowa wearing these uniforms.
And you found this newspaper article that 2 of the students were invited to Alice Cooper's show in their full regalia, looking great, posing with Alice Cooper.
So Cooper can't get his roadies to wear these uniforms, but he does invite 2 of the members to fly out to a concert in LA, and they all get to hang out together, and that's glorious. It's glorious.
If there's a silver lining to be had, it's that.
They've got to be still kicking around, right? Somewhere, Avery, have you explored the thrift shops of Central Iowa?
Not yet, but this is totally incredible. I mean, and there must be a story behind, like, however the band leader, heard about these uniforms. It's all, it just smells too unlikely for it not to be a very delicious story.
Yeah. Well, that's a good, tantalizing thing to leave it with. We'll see who. Do we know any good reporters who look at strange fashion stories? Who can maybe track this down? I don't know. But no, this has been really great. Avery, thank you so much for doing this, and of course the 2 seasons of Articles of Interest are out there for you to listen to if you have not heard it. But Avery Trufelman, thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was really fascinating.
And Nicole Hammer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is an all-in-one management software with apps for every business need. Odoo has apps for CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, manufacturing, and everything in between. And they're all in one easy-to-use software. And the best part about Odoo? All Odoo apps are integrated, helping you get things done faster and more efficiently. So, when you think about business, think Odoo. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's ODOO.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.